access to information, privacy, and ethics.
De la Chambre de Commune. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23, 2022, and therefore members can attend in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Should any technical challenges arise, please advise me. Please note that we may need to suspend for a few minutes as we need to ensure that all members are able to fully participate. Pursuant to Standing Order 1083H and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, May 16, 2022, the committee is resuming its study to the Access to Information and Privacy System. Madame Le Geoffrier, est-ce que tout...
Madam Clerk, have all of the sound tests been completed for witnesses?
Et pour tous de la committee. I'd now like to welcome our witnesses as individuals. We've got Dean Beebe, who's a journalist. Andrea Conte, is it Conte, sir? Yeah, Conte, writer, researcher, and media artist. We've also got from the Canadian Association of Journalists, Mr. Brent Jolly. Unfortunately, we're missing Mr. Trump at this point. He hasn't connected, but I know that we are trying to make a connection with him. Before we commence the meeting, this meeting is going till 6:30. It's scheduled to that. We will have to do some committee business to dispose of a motion that is before the committee. I'm going to try to time that until 6:25, so that'll give us almost an hour and 55 minutes. I understand that the parties have been in discussions and that we will very likely, I hope, dispose of that motion very quickly. Okay, so I want to make that very clear right off the top for our witnesses that with 5 minutes left in the session, we will be going to committee business, and I will be. So I'll time everything accordingly. Mr. Beebe, the floor is yours for 5 minutes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me as a witness today. This inquiry, by my count, is at least the 16th broad review of the Access to Information Act since the legislation was passed in 1982. In this country, we love to study transparency laws thoroughly to ensure we don't actually get around to fixing them. I'm an independent journalist with long experience of using the Act. I speak from a journalist perspective, though my frustrations with the Act mirror those of other users, including Indigenous peoples, civic activists, and even backbench MPs. Journalists have been abandoning access to information in droves lately. The desertion began before COVID hit. The pandemic chased away the stragglers. Less than 5% of all requests filed in 2021 came from the media. That's half the level of 5 years earlier and a third of a decade ago. Why are reporters giving up? Because, as study after study has shown, turnaround times are terrible and getting worse. MPs who passed the law in 1982 expected most requests could be answered in a month, with some exceptions. Since then, the reality for journalists is the reverse. Requests answered in 30 days are the rare exception, with most taking longer, far longer. Bureaucrats also now realize they face a much bigger blowback from releasing information than from withholding it. And the law provides them a rich menu of excuses to keep things buried. So when stale dated access documents finally do arrive on a reporter's desk, they've been picked clean of meaningful content. Imagine telling your editor that you won't know whether you'll have an access-based story for at least 6 more months, maybe a year or longer. This, while the rest of the newsroom reporters are scrambling to get a scoop out before noon. The news business has been caught in a death spiral for 15 years. Journalists are being thrown overboard to lighten sinking ships. Sizable communities no longer have local reporters watching for fraud in town councils. Meanwhile, governments are ever more bloated with spin doctors, social media gurus, image consultants. It's not a fair fight. And it's not just journalists down on the mat. Democracy is getting a bloody nose as well. Let's consider some advice for reform already given to this committee. You've been told that the law needs a reverse onus. Information should be released unless the government can show that it shouldn't. But the law already has a reverse onus in Section 2A. New words saying the same thing in a different way won't save the day. You've been told the Information Commissioner should become a transparency czar with broader responsibilities. But the Commissioner can't even discharge her current mandate. She takes too long to resolve complaints, as much as 10 years. Let's not burden her with more responsibilities until she can deliver on the existing ones. You've also been told that proactive release of more documents is a solution to a dysfunctional access system. If government pushes out more documents, citizens won't need to pull them using access requests. This is a false hope. Governments may willingly release downstream documents that are innocuous and safe, but upstream documents tied to decision-making will never be made proactively available unless, of course, they've been scrubbed clean. That's why we have freedom of information laws, so citizens aren't stuck with records that have been sanitized in government's interest. My own prescription for reform is to stay clear of long checklists. I suggest focusing on a few key changes. 1, pull down the brick wall protecting cabinet records. Limit the protection period to 10 years. Stop withholding records that have nothing to do with cabinet deliberations, that are factual or background. Give the Information Commissioner access to cabinet records so she can review any decision to withhold them. 2, set tougher limits on a department's ability to delay. If an institution blows past a deadline, for example, take away their authority to claim exemptions. 3, define advice in the law much more narrowly so departments can't use it as a catch-all for withholding information. 4, put a time limit on the Information Commissioner's investigations, say 6 months. If she hasn't finished by then, let complainants go to court. Just getting these few things done would start us down the road to reform. It would also give a dwindling pool of journalists a better shot at holding governments to account. Thank you for your invitation. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Beebe. Mr. Conte, you're next. One of the things about being chair is I have a little bit of latitude with time, so you have 5 minutes, sir, but if you need a few more seconds, please feel free to take it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to committee members for inviting me to speak with you today. My name is Andrea Conte, and I'm an independent researcher and work in the media arts, and I've circulated 2 articles to members that relate to my work with Canadian state records, one which took 5 years to write because of access delays. With the many days of hearings before this committee on Canada's Freedom of Information system, I think it's important that we clearly understand the origin story of the Access to Information Act of 1983. Throughout the 1970s, Canada was trying to play catch-up with the United States, which established its own Freedom of Information legislation in 1966. And it's important to place this time period in relevant context. It was during this era of the 60s and 70s that the RCMP Security Service engaged in routine abuses that culminated in the MacDonald Commission of Inquiry into RCMP abuses that varied from forged letters to the infiltration of racialized and Indigenous groups, among others. All the while, 1 in 20 Canadians had a file with the Security and Intelligence Service. And it was amidst this crisis that the Access to Information Act was ushered in, drafted, and sold to the public as a modern right to hold the government accountable. According to Don Britton, an NFB and CBC documentarian who covered the crisis at the time, access to information legislation was, quote, so artfully worded that it would become little more than an instrument of concealment, end quote. 40 years later, we know this prediction to be true all too well. During the press conference that introduced the Access to Information Act in June of '83, ministers celebrated the favorable similarities of the Canadian Act with its American FOIA counterpart. But this has never been the case. On contemporary records, the U.S. has an expedited processing clause for records that relate to urgent, ongoing matters of federal government activity. Canada, however, has no such clause for urgent disclosure of access requests that seek answers to ongoing and urgent matters of public concern, like the public health benefit of the ArriveCAN app, for example. On matters of war or international affairs, the U.S. allows journalists or members of the public to seek direct legal remedies when their government denies, for example, records of internal reviews of its war effort or complicity in war crimes such as the torture of Afghan detainees. The U.S. permits direct access to the courts without delay, producing journalism, such as when the Washington Post published the Afghanistan papers after a 3-year FOIA lawsuit. In Canada, the Access to Information Act obstructs access to the courts through the drawn-out preliminary appeals process with the Office of the Information Commissioner, restricting the capacity of journalists to do their job. I myself continue to appeal the delay and censorship exemptions over records of internal reviews of Canada's war in Afghanistan, with requests on these files that began 10 years ago. On declassification in historic records, the committee has heard how the 1983 Act nullified the previous declassification system, which created a disaster for anyone with any vested interest in doing historical research, especially on issues that involve prisons, police, military, and other institutional forms of state violence within Canada's borders and abroad. When one visits library archives, whether you're revisiting redacted RCMP surveillance files, for example, on the 1930s Communist Party of Canada or the 1969 Sir George Williams University uprising, not only are release packages on these files still heavily redacted, previously published newspaper clippings from the Globe and Mail and other mainstream media organizations have been redacted in full by CSIS. And if any member of the public wanted to challenge any or all of these redactions, they can't, because the Act treats a request for information like a consumer good. The opening of one record is not an opening of the record for all. Only the requester can appeal it, which means that you have to file the ATIP request all over again as though the previous request never occurred. In the case of contemporary records, the Open Canada portal includes only a fraction of access to information summaries that have been processed by federal agencies over the 2 most recent years, and that's if agencies upload any data at all. Every month, the portal erases access to information summaries that exceed the most recent 2-year window. For all these reasons, after 40 years, I believe this access to information cycle of censor, erase, and repeat has turned into an instrument that directly obstructs and interferes both with government accountability and Section 2B of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I know this panel is fielding recommendations that numbers into the hundreds. I do not believe the current system can be reformed, as it is a discretionary system of good faith with far too many root problems. And I do recommend the committee assemble a panel of constitutional experts who could provide input into the report on how the Act interferes with freedom of expression and freedom of the press and other media of communication. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Conte. We're going to now go online to Mr. Brent Jolly, who is the president of the Canadian Association of Journalists. Now, I don't see him on my screen, but he's here.
Yeah, he's here. I spoke to him earlier.
Okay. Mr. Jolly, you have 5 minutes, sir, to address the committee. Go ahead, please.
He was here.
Oh, I know he was.
did a sound check with him.
Yeah, I know he was here.
We'll get tech to call him. Mr. Trump just signed on.
Okay,
He's here under guest. I'll just promote him to a panelist.
okay.
And you can go to Mr. Trump.
Welcome, Mr. Trump. Nothing like being put in the spotlight right away. Okay? Yeah. I see. Mr. Trump, I think you've got to do something with your camera there. I did see Mr. Jolly was here, yeah.
didn't want to take over the microphone.
Yeah, no, if you want to, please try to facilitate this.
Mr. Trump, can you hear me? We can see your camera, but we can't see you, and your microphone is on mute.
I've run into this problem before, and that is that maybe the camera is down inside the computer, it looks like. Yeah, I think we're going to suspend for a minute. Thank you. Back to order. I apologize. We're having a little bit of technical difficulty. Welcome back, Mr. Jolly. I hate to put you on the spot. You look like you're out of breath there, but you have
that's okay.
You have 5 minutes to address the committee, sir. Thank you.
Thanks very much. It's the wonders of home internet, I suppose. So thanks very much to everyone, to the members of the committee for extending this kind invitation to me and the association I represent, which is the Canadian Association of Journalists. We have a lot of important opinions and views to share on the critical need for changes to be implemented to Canada's, what we would say is an arcane access to information system. By way of simple introduction, I'll begin by telling you about the Canadian Association of Journalists, which is a professional organization composed of more than 1,300 journalists from across the country. Our organization regularly engages in public interest advocacy work and professional development for our members. Access to information issues clearly overlap on both of these areas of our mandate. Since the CAJ was founded in 1978, then as the Center for Investigative Journalism, our association has been at the forefront of advocating for both federal and provincial access to information regimes that are more robust, transparent, and accountable than those currently in place. For decades, we have devoted an exceptional amount of resources to helping our member journalists with training on how to wade through the many layers of opaque rules, exemptions, and limitations that have served to unite generations of Canadian journalists in utter frustration and dizzying dismay. In addition to calling on governments of all political stripes to take proactive steps to improve what is a broken system and increasingly falling into international disrepute, our association, and partners have crafted thoughtful suggestions to help reimagine Canada's beleaguered access to information regime. I'd be happy to share these ideas, which put the public's right to know at the forefront formally with the committee as a supplement to today's testimony. My reason for giving this short history lesson off the top is not born out of a desire for personal or institutional aggrandization. Its purpose is really to underscore for members of this committee and to the wider Canadian public the complete and utter sense of frustration at the death grip governments hold on information in this country. But you don't have to just take my word for it or any of my fellow witnesses here today. I think one can listen to the Information Commissioner, Carolyn Menard, an officer of this Parliament, to what she said to then Treasury Board Minister Jean-Yves Duclos in a letter a couple of years ago. In that letter, Ms. Menard wrote that the federal ATIP system, and I quote, may soon be beyond repair and is already faced with chronic under-resourcing. This was, of course, before the COVID pandemic reaped its ugly head. Madame Menard encouraged Minister Duclos to commit proper funding to the system, proactively disclose more data, and bring institutions fully into the digital world. How have these helpful suggestions been met to date? I'd say with crickets. In fact, as some of my colleagues have reported, the COVID pandemic has only helped to further exacerbate this country's encroaching cultures of secrecy. In late 2020, for example, the Winnipeg Free Press reported that less than half of federal access to information offices were operating at full capacity. It was reported as well in that article that many departments had deprioritized the process of access requests, which had not really been treated as a critical service. What was the result of that? Well, backlogs and no clear guidelines when requests would be answered. I'm here today to tell you how an effective access to information law serves the public's right to know and allows journalists for whom I represent to do their jobs effectively. We know that excellent journalism has the power to reshape public policy and improve the lives of Canadians. We've seen this very clearly play out during the COVID-19 pandemic. Done properly, an Update Access to Information Act has the potential to be one of the most transformative pieces of legislation ever passed by Canada's government. But for decades, however, we have documented golden promises to modernize a system increasingly brought into disrepute and disrepair. Certainly, changes do not happen overnight, but Canada's access to information system is broken, and 40 years is, frankly, well, a long time without making any concerted efforts to solve the problem. So let me put it another way. You don't put duct tape on a Formula One race car's broken chassis and expect it to put in competitive lap times, let alone win races or world championships. What I would suggest you do is retire the car, get it fixed properly for the next time out, and start over again. It's simple engineering. The same holds true for exercises like this one. We need to stop tinkering at the margins and trying for quick fixes. Those only help to engineer enhanced cultures of secrecy. There have been endless government discussion papers, public dialogues, and academic studies that point to a better way forward. The answer to the problems that besiege the current act are right in front of us. One step in making change, I would posit, is crystal clear. Elected officials, members of parliament, and cabinet ministers, for example, must find the courage and political will to hold themselves to a higher standard. Anything less is simply going to result in yet another choreographed diversion from the important work that must be done.
Mr. Jolly.
So thank you for the opportunity to be here today and to present this evidence for your consideration. I look forward to taking your questions after.
Thank you, sir. The worst part of my job is having to cut people off. Believe me, I don't like it. Mr. Trump, are you online, sir? Okay. We're not seeing him. I'm not seeing his microphone come on. I think what we're going to do now, just to save time for the committee, is we're going to go to our first line of questioning. These are 6-minute rounds, and I invite Mr. Keurig. Sorry, sir.
Just a point of order,
Yeah.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
So if the technical issue with Mr. Trump is able to be rectified, could perhaps he make his opening comments at the top of the next hour, and if that was okay with the committee? I mean,
it's okay with the committee. Obviously, there's a technical issue right now. I mean, he was invited by the committee to appear.
Right.
If we can resolve this issue, then I would invite him to speak as long as the committee is okay with it, and I suspect that they would be.
Okay.
I don't want to speak for the committee,
Yeah,
but he
just
was
instead
asked to appear. So.
sorry, Chair, just
Yep.
instead of interrupting the question
Yep.
rounds, if there's a technical issue that's able
Okay.
to be resolved at the top of the
Let's
next
get
hour,
through
I
this
just
round.
suggest that.
Let's get through this round, and then we'll figure it out. And hopefully, we have it figured out. So, Mr. Keurig, you have 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the witnesses joining us here today. And although I know sometimes politicians and journalists have what can be an adversarial relationship, acknowledge fully how important this conversation is in terms of accountability. Now, I will start, Mr. Chair, by asking the same question that I've asked all of our witnesses, and that is just two very, very simple questions to provide some context about how important this discussion is, and I'll go around the room both in person and virtually. But before I do that, just to invite members of this committee, because time is, of course, a precious resource, please feel free to send further information if you don't have a chance to get it all in front of us here today. My first question is, when it comes to the access to information system, having one that works, having one that is effective, having one that gives Canadians the information that they need from their government, is that essential to a modern and functioning democracy? I'll start with Mr. Beebe.
The short answer is yes. You can't have a functioning democracy without some kind of freedom of information system.
Okay. Thank you. And Mr. Conte.
I guess it depends how you define a functioning democracy, but which I don't know if I've seen in my lifetime. But in theory, yes.
Okay. Okay. And Mr. Jolly. Oh, you're on mute, Mr. Jolly.
Hello, this is Stanley Trump. Can you hear me? Is my microphone working?
Yes, Mr. Trump. I'm just gonna keep you on mute. I'm gonna stop the time here. But sir, we were having technical difficulties with your connection. I'm going to keep you on mute until we get through this round, and then I'm going to invite you to speak to the committee. Okay, sir? Because and I don't see you either. That's the other problem. So I just heard you, but I can't see you. So we are going to we're just going to put you on mute for a bit until we can resolve this technical issue. But we're going to continue on with the witnesses, sir. Okay?
Sorry, sir, just to answer your question, yes, I think there's a widely attributed quote to Mr. Thomas Jefferson that says that information is the currency of democracy. So yes, I'd be inclined to agree with your question/comment.
Okay. I appreciate that, and I value greatly referencing that quote of which I've considered myself. The second question that I've asked all of the witnesses that have appeared on this study is the status quo acceptable? And I know you've all outlined that in your statements, but again, it's helpful in terms of compiling testimony for the report. So I'd ask the three of you here: is the status quo to Canada's access to information system acceptable? Mr. Beebe.
No, and it's in sharp decline, so it's getting worse every year.
Thank you. And Mr. Conte?
I reject the status quo.
Okay. And Mr. Jolly?
I think it's clear that our entire information ecosystem is something that needs to be, it needs valuable support right now. So time is of the essence.
Thank you very much. And now I know, as a member of Parliament, myself and my office, we've filed several hundred access to information requests on a whole host of issues, from dealing with constituent casework to some of the big political issues of the day. But I'd find it valuable to hear, maybe just in short, and I'll go around the table again, just if you could point to maybe a couple of the extreme examples of delays or redactions that you've experienced in your time experiencing the access to information system firsthand. And this time I'll go in the reverse. So Mr. Jolly, if you could try to keep it in about 30 seconds. I know that's probably pretty tough, but just examples of either delays or redactions that have been the most egregious in your experience.
Oh, for sure. I mean, we've done a lot of work on RCMP and trying to uncover police malfeasance and accountability. We've run different campaigns, of course, over time, where we've documented and asked for our members to provide a series of information, and I'd be happy to share that with the committee for its review and consideration.
That would be great. And if you have examples of the number of years or whatever the case,
Absolutely.
that'd be fantastic as well. Mr. Conte, the same question. If you have any examples that you could share with the committee so we can really understand in about 30 seconds. I know that's probably tough, but.
I mean, in one of the articles that I submitted to you, I reported on a presentation with LAC, Library Archives Canada, and Office of Information Commissioners, a forum that they presented online about a year ago, where they reported that 80% of top secret, 80% of the information that is classified as top secret in LAC vaults are not top secret. But I mean, what I think is even, this symbolizes, I think, the frictional nature between CSIS, who is doing those redactions and maintaining that censorship, and the relationship between both LAC and the Office of the Information Commissioner. So I would invite you to speak to those representatives to get more clarity on that.
And I appreciate that. In my last 30 seconds, Mr. Beebe.
Well, to be brief, I've had so many disappointments, but, for example, I've asked for briefing notes for Prime Minister Harper and received them 7 years later after a new government and 3 elections. So how am I supposed to hold government to account when I'm become essentially an historian rather than a journalist?
I appreciate that. Thank you very much to the witnesses for your information.
Thank you, Mr. Couric. Next, we'll go to Ms. Hepner. It looks like some of the technical challenges may have been corrected with Mr. Tromp, but we're just going to. You're in the bullpen right now, Mr. Tromp. So we're gonna have a pitching change in a few minutes. Ms. Hepner, you're next for 6 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a pleasure for me to be here today with journalists. I was a journalist for over 20 years, and I was able to see firsthand the changes over time.
Heard from witnesses at this committee previously is that there's actually more information available than any time previous in our history. And I'm wondering what sort of challenges and also what sort of benefits journalists are seeing from that change, that there's actually more information available now than ever before. And so I'll ask all of you, but maybe Mr. Beebe, you can start.
Thank you for the question. All information is not created equal, so a lot of information is pushed out there that has really little relevance to public affairs and public discourse. So it's a bit of a game to say that more and more information is available. Is it useful information? Is it information that that helps inquire into decision making at the highest levels? And I would say it's really that core information that we're not seeing more of. In fact, I think we're seeing less and less of it. So, I really have to push back against this argument that, we're awash in information. Not all information is created equal, and much of it is not useful to the profession of journalism.
Thank you, Mr. Conte. Do you have something else to add?
It depends what kind of information you're talking about. There's more misinformation available than ever before as well. So, if we're talking about government information, it's very easy to manipulate what is credible, legitimate information and what is not.
Mr. Jolly, do you have anything to add to the observation by previous witnesses to this committee that more information is available from government than ever before?
Yeah, I think that I'd definitely push back on that in a similar fashion to that emphasized by Mr. Beebe and Mr. Conte here. I don't think we can equate volume with quality. I think that's an unfair comparing apples to oranges in this case. I think what we need to look at is of course the quality of information and information that reveals things about how Canada operates, how decisions of the federal government are made, and information that promotes transparency and accountability, not just spin doctoring and talking points and sanitized notes.
So, picking up on that quality versus quantity, Mr. Beebe, you brought up that the percentage of journalists filing access to information requests is a lot lower than it has been previously. But I'm wondering if the percentage is what's changed and not the number of journalists. I don't know the answer to that. But we know that there's a huge volume of people, not just journalists. It's been ballooning, the number of people filing access to information requests. Do you think journalists have stopped, or do you think they're just being overwhelmed by other people filing requests?
It's hard to say because Treasury Board keeps such poor statistics. They do an annual report, but it's quite unreliable. They don't use scientific methods to gather their data, so it's a lot of guesswork. But on that point, it's interesting that there are more requests than ever before. The number goes up. It's a huge number now. It's well over it's almost to 200,000. If proactive disclosure of government information was being so helpful in this process, why are so many people asking more and more often for records under access to information? The reverse should happen. If we're being proactively making useful information available, then the number should go down, but it goes up. And I think that's very telling because, you know, the proactive release of information is really just material that has very little relevance, and that's why I think the numbers are going up so enormously.
Let me read a quote from a previous witness, Mr. Wernick. He asked us to remember that a request is not a request is not a request. Some are extremely focused and they know what they're looking for, and it's relatively easy to decide whether it should go out or not go out to apply to the screens. But there are also requests formed particularly by brokers and resellers. So he's talking about people who access information in order to sell to someone else. They're looking for information so they can resell it. Picking up the quote, which are kind of like the trawl nets that go over the ocean floor, scooping up everything that lives. I used to get a monthly request when I was deputy minister for every note I had ever sent to the minister that month. And so I'm wondering if requests like these are bogging down the system, that maybe they're not from journalists, they're not specific, it's not people looking for information that they particularly want, they're just throwing out a trawling net to see if they can find anything that sticks.
In about 30 seconds.
Mr. Beebe, why don't you answer it?
I would say those data brokers have every right to request information, just like all of us. And you're forgetting that these people are doing a service, they're selling a service to Canadians who find this information useful, and the government isn't supplying it to them. So the data brokers are, and so that's useful. And data brokers pay taxes, and so, you know, I don't think it's fair to single out a category of user as somehow gumming up the system. I think, you know, if there's any solution to that, then government should just make available the data that these brokers are after, and everyone will be happier. But in the meantime, that's not happening, and I think they have every right to request information, like journalists and anyone else.
Thank you, Mr. Beebe. Mr. Villemure, vous avez la parole.
You have the floor for 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Jolly, earlier you talked about taking the car to the garage. Do you need to fix the car or change cars? Answer. We need to know that the system needs to be continually reviewed.
Instances of governments of all stripes. This is the greatest opposition issue of all time, I would say, is access to information and transparency. So I do think, it does take a concerted effort on the part of policymakers to say, yes, we're going to do this differently. And we believe in keeping some of the promises that are often made to journalists and to citizens in Canada, because so far it's repeatedly fallen short.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Mr. Beebe, earlier you said it was the 16th reform that you had participated in. Is that correct?
Not that I participated in, but that has been conducted.
Est-ce que vous...
Would you say that there's a difference between the goal of the Access to Information Act and the goal that it seeks to achieve?
I'm not sure what you mean by the goal of the Access to Information Act.
quoi sert la loi?
What is it? What does it do? What's the point of the act?
The point of the Act, from my point of view, is to empower ordinary citizens, to empower Canadians, to challenge their government, to hold their government to account, to acquire information about themselves and issues that they're interested in. It shifts power from government, the power over information, to the citizenry, and that's a revolution.
Est-ce que c'est ça qui se passe?
Is that what's happening in practice?
No, because governments, not just this one, but through the 40 years of the Act, have jealously guarded their control of information. It's a natural process, wanting to avoid embarrassment, wanting to keep maybe malfeasance covered up, whatever. But controlling information is important to retaining and using power. And so I think there's a kind of a natural bent on the side of government to make sure that access to information does not work.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Mr. Conte, you talked about democracy earlier, and I'm very interested in this. You said that no democracy is perfect, if I understood. But in the current state for the access of information system, what would be your suggestions for improving the situation in democracy? And I want to talk about the real world and not what we would love to see. I'll give you the floor now.
Merci, Monsieur Villemur.
Thank you, Mr. Villemur.
I think that, to echo what my colleague Dean said about how this act was intended to be a tool to shift a balance of power in terms of citizens, everyday people trying to have a relationship with government where they have power to get knowledge, right? To learn what their government is doing, both day to day but unfortunately, because it also nullified the declassification system also in the past. The way that this act was designed 40 years ago did not do that. It failed, and now we have 40 years of evidence that show this. I think that if we were to do this over again and press reset, which I believe we need to, we would pursue something like a citizens forum on the future of Canada that happened, it was called the Spicer Commission, where it should be citizens themselves that need to participate in the formulation of a piece of legislation that is for them, right? It's not for bureaucrats and government officials. It's for them to say how they want their information, because right now, it's resulted in the obscurity for so long that you have to wonder why is it that people have such problem knowing clarity around residential schools, for example, elements of history, current events. Like, this transcends so many different areas about how people learn about what this nation is.
Justement, je vais aller sur les...
With archives and knowing our own history, in the current state of things, we can't really learn from history, correct?
No, I mean, if I'm organize special trips to library archives to look at previous access packages that have been released, to see that newspapers have been redacted by CSIS. These are public domain documents. Like, this is very telling of what the government doesn't want you to know.
Do you have an example of that you could share with us?
I mentioned it in my in my opening statement. I research historic events of the 60s, one including the student protest that happened at Sir George Williams University, an event that Concordia University just apologized for a month ago in calling the police. Yet when you go to the police archive, which is at Library Archives Canada, of requesters who requested these documents in the 90s, when they were first being released by CSIS. Newspaper articles from that event from mainstream media organizations are completely redacted. So just imagine how redacted the documents are of the Informer reports.
Thank you, Mr. Conte. Merci, Monsieur Villemur.
Thank you, Mr. Villemur.
Mr. Green, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and welcome to all the guests. I'm very grateful that we were able to embark on this study, given some of the false starts we might have had administratively getting folks booked in for this. I want you to know that this committee, I can say, with assurance in a nonpartisan way, takes this study very seriously, and I'm looking forward to some substantive recommendations beyond just the talking about it and the consultations. So thank you for being here today. I want to begin with Mr. Conte.
Sorry, Mr. Green, just maybe lower the microphone just a little bit, if you don't mind. Thank you.
Is that a little bit better?
You gotta speak a little bit louder, if you don't.
I'll
It's a
try
bit
to
better.
continue talking now. Is that better? Okay. I want to begin with Mr. Conte. Mr. Conte, have you had the ability to watch any of our previous studies related to this subject matter?
Oh.
Yeah, I think.
Do you mean like previous hearings of the committee?
Correct, yeah.
Yes.
So I bring that up because I just want to, say that I've certainly referenced your work, and I've put the question of administrative sabotage to multiple subject matter experts across the country, and I would say a large portion of them agree in the context in which you framed it in your piece entitled Administrative Sabotage, where you discussed how COINTELPRO records have become available in the US due to their declassification system, but in Canada, these records are extremely difficult to access. And as a result, accountability from the government for their past abuses, and you've referenced a couple of other examples, is absent from policy discourse. As somebody who has myself in a contemporary way been actively involved in civil rights, particularly regarding, the Black Lives Matter movement for Black lives, police brutality, and other things, I can only imagine that perhaps somewhere out there might be a file on myself. Can you just describe for a moment, in that context, the impact that this retaining of documents, this withholding of critical information, impacts the way in which Canadians view our own culpability within systemic racism and anti-Blackness in Canada?
I mean, I think the impact on the mainstream, of course, is obvious. If government documents on these events, be it historic events from the 60s and 70s, or what's happening right now with Trans Mountain Pipeline and the criminalization of Indigenous protesters, where you cannot access what documents related to their arrest because they're seen as ongoing law enforcement issues. I think that when you look at greater impact, whether it's contemporary or historic, it's a demonstration of institutional white supremacy. Like, if we have non-state organizations that are coming forth with apologies on these kinds of events, yet state institutions are maintaining their status quo that they've kept for 40 years in terms of not disclosing or not being truthful on the kind of sabotage that they performed during those exact events, then I hesitate to say the impact that this has on the future of Canada, where so many different kinds of conflicts and different points of view are growing farther apart.
Thank you. And I say that you'd referenced TMX. I think about the Wet'suwet'en. I think about the way in which the state holds the monopoly of violence and the ability to have civil or civic accountability, civilian accountability over policing. We're certainly dealing with that in a bunch of different ways. In fact, in dealing with the Emergency Act, the occupation, the convoy, getting information from our own governments, even as MPs with what should be supreme powers to send for documents, has been very difficult. So in your opinion, does the continued classification of these documents, just expanding on this notion of understanding the history of Canada and the abilities for citizens to advocate for policy changes, the ability for those in governments to write informed policy. You talked about this as being an extension of systemic white supremacy within government. I'm wondering if you could just expand on that a little bit in terms of the work that you do and what you see in a contemporary context.
I mean, a lot of these issues are absent from policy discourse because the starting point is knowing what the state's implication and role is to begin with. So if I go, for example, on security state issues, all of these issues implicate CSIS, if not directly, by consultation. Yet, if you want to consult a record from CSIS as an individual, you are not even allowed to know the Access to Information Coordinator's name. When you look at the index of the Access to Information Coordinator, which is listed publicly for every single department, CSIS likes to pretend this office, the Access to Information Office, is the public most facing office of their institution because they have to interact with the public. Yet they like to pretend that they're in some kind of secret operation where the culture is like Fight Club. You don't talk or speak about Fight Club. Like how can you broker any kind of relevant discourse when this is the attitude of, when it comes to just knowing, yet alone how we shift from knowing into public policy discourse?
Mr. Chair, how much time do I have left?
Probably, I stopped the clock on the technical thing, so it was like 20 seconds, Mr. Green.
Okay, I'll just wait till the next round.
Okay, thank you. So I'm at this point going to invite Mr. Trump to join us, and I apologize, sir, for the technical difficulties. Like the other witnesses that are here today, you'll have 5 minutes to address the committee, and you'll participate in the second round of questioning along with the other witnesses as well. So you've got 5 minutes, sir. Go ahead, please. And aussi, Monsieur Villemort, juste pour y attester aussi.
He was also tested, and all is good.
Mr. Trump, please go ahead for 5 minutes.
Hello, thank you. Almost a miracle I'm here today at all. It's the most complex Zoom technical challenges for a half hour that I've ever seen in my life. Anyways, here we are. I'm calling from Vancouver. Well, to begin my remarks, as you must know, many leading open government advocates have declined to testify to this committee as they regard it as a very ineffectual process for many reasons, unlike other such parliamentary hearings of the past on the subject. For example, the short time frame renders it impossible. One expert group complained it was invited to submit written submissions at 8:24 p.m. one night, given a reply for 3 p.m. the next day, and expecting an appearance for the following business day. As well, the so-called review of the ETHI Act was announced by the Treasury Board Secretariat in June 2020, yet it has repeatedly extended the deadline for completion, with no end yet in sight. And yet, all that being said, I will still utilize any opportunity to explain to MPs and the public the urgent need for major reforms and the value of FOI. Today, I'm speaking only for myself and not on behalf of any organization. My testimony consists of 3 records. These and many more are posted at my website, canadafoi.ca. First, the committee was sent a link to a report that I authored for the Center of Free Expression entitled, "It's Time for Change, 206 Recommendations for Reforms to Canada's Access to Information Act." This is the most complete set of ETHI reform recommendations ever produced. It consists of advice often repeated over 3 decades and mostly to no avail. They're based on best practices elsewhere in the world and the advice of information commissioners, access policy experts, frequent users, and civil society groups. I hope you've all had a chance to read over those 206 recommendations. Second, I sent you a link to my book, Fallen Behind, Canada's Access to Information Act in the World Context. The first edition appeared in 2008 and the second in 2020. Because there was no time to translate this 400-page book into French, the clerk instead printed out its 5-page summary of chapters. I hope you received that. Third, I compiled a database of all 6,500 news articles produced through the ETHI Act since its passage in 1983, and I wrote 100-word summaries of each. They are in 41 topic headings. I created this index to demonstrate the value of FOI laws to the public, plus provide a morale boost and story ideas for reporters and journalism students. The sad thing is that most of the records in this request should have been routinely released. In brief, the ETHI Act contains 3 statutory black holes that most urgently require fixing. The first is Section 21, exemption for policy advice. This needs a harms test and a 10-year time limit instead of the current 20 years, and a clear statement that background facts and analysis cannot be withheld as policy. Second, Canada has created more than 100 wholly owned and controlled entities to perform public function and spend billions of taxpayers' dollars while excluding these from the scope of FOI laws. For example, the exclusion of the Canadian Blood Services, the Nuclear Waste Management Organization, air traffic controllers could result in harm to public health and safety. Third, the greatest single threat to the FOI system today may be so-called oral government. This occurs when officials no longer commit their thoughts to paper and convey them verbally instead, to avert the chance of the information emerging in response to FOI requests. Thus, Canada urgently needs a comprehensive law to create and preserve records with penalties for non-compliance. We should instead follow the example of Newfoundland, where in 2012, the public rebelled against the Premier's plan to convert its FOI law into the worst in Canada and instead pushed to make it the best. Sadly, although I believe you mean well, it is likely that your advice will be ignored again by Cabinet and the bureaucracy, as it has been for 35 years, such as with this open and shut report produced by a panel of MPs in 1987. I only wish your power was equivalent to your goodwill. Thank you, merci. I would please answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Tromp. Appreciate your words. We're going to go to the second round now. Just a reminder that we've got roughly about 55 minutes of questioning. On va commencer avec Monsieur Gould.
We'll start with Mr. Gould for 5 minutes and then Mr. Fergus. Mr. Gould. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. I get the impression that over time, investigative journalism might disappear because of access to information issues. It seems to be a time of opinion journalism. Experts write in newspapers, speak on television. Social media has accelerated the need for information. It's very different from 40 years ago, where we could hear news in a newspaper, and it could span over a month. You shared your frustration that after 5-7 years, trying to hold on to these facts to publish an article, well, would it still be relevant to publish 5-7 years later? It probably would have been more relevant the day or the month that you would have wanted to write your article. Can you tell me if you believe that there is still a future for investigative journalism? I'll start with Mr. Conte, and then I will give the floor to everybody else. Mr. Conte?
Merci, Monsieur Gould.
Thank you, Mr. Gould.
Referenced the 5 years to write an article. It was more so the 5 years of documented frustrations with the Access Act in terms of performing research on a single topic on COINTEL profiles in Canada. So these were archives that I was trying to request from Library Archives Canada, but where I found myself having to go to the United States, to National Archives in Washington, D.C., because they have a declassification system of after 25 years. You know, this particular topic involves RCMP and FBI collaboration. So I found it very ironic that in order to do historical research on this era of Canadian history, that I had to go to the United States to get the records, because in Canada, CSIS still considers them to be an operational threat.
I would say you were asking about the future of investigative journalism. I would say that the branch of investigative journalism that relies on documents is dying because of the inadequacies of the Access to Information Act. And, you know, it's not that other investigations can't happen. We rely on whistleblowers. We rely on leaks. There's other things you can do to produce investigative, deep journalism. But using documents that are obtained under Freedom of Information are a particular branch that's, that has its advantages. And the advantages are that you're not talking about one person's opinion of what happened or one person's view about what should have happened, but you're looking at material from inside government itself that lays out the record. And so it's a form of investigative journalism that's hard for governments to brush off, to deny, if you're simply quoting to them the very records from their government. So I think that is a big loss, and we're seeing it happen now. We're seeing this loss of this document-based investigative journalism as we speak, as the system, the Access to Information system, becomes less and less reliable and available to journalists.
Mr. Jolly.
Mr. Jolly?
Oui, merci. I'd like to echo a lot of Dean's comments about the challenges facing the decline of access to information documentary journalism. I think in a lot of ways, just to sort of finish off on what he was mentioning, I think, you know, the idea that a poor access to information system transforms a lot of what could be considered, you know, sort of day-to-day journalism into the need for investigative journalism, which in the current economic climate of news is largely unsustainable. The second thought I'd share with that is the inclusion of access documents obtained through the access system in itself, when included in journalistic storytelling, is an indictment very clearly of the system itself. You know, the idea of having to go back saying, you know, this took place 5 or 7 years ago, for example, I think is very clear to readers and the audience that, you know, the challenges that journalists undertake to acquire and to gain access to these materials, and that's something that really needs to change.
Thank you, Mr. Jolly. Monsieur Fergus, pour 5 minutes.
For 5 minutes, please.
Le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I would like to thank our witnesses for coming here today. I'll start with you, Mr. Beebe, because I've been following your career for a long time. And what you've had to say about our access to information system. Mr. Beebe, talking about proactive disclosure, you mentioned, if I can quote you in English,
seeking info from government if proactive disclosures is working, or something to that effect. Je vous pose la question.
And I have a question. Around this table, we talked with people who work in different departments, and they stated that 3/4 of access to information requests focus on one department, the Immigration, Refugee, and Citizenship Canada department, because people who have sent in their application would like to have an update on the situation. And the information system in that department is not good enough. Does that respond in a way to your question?
The citizenship and immigration load on the access to information system is quite ridiculous. That department made a decision 20, 30 years ago, I don't know how long it was, at least 20 years ago, that it was getting a lot of questions about clients' files, and it said, we don't have the administrative capacity to respond to all of these inquiries. We're just going to put the whole thing under access to information. And so it was a deliberate decision to use the Act in a way that it was not intended to be used. And so the vast majority, I think it's 75% of requests, are of that nature. They're just immigration consultants and lawyers asking about their clients. Now, to me, this is absurd that you would use a freedom of information system to answer that kind of question. Why wouldn't you just simply set up your own separate computer system to respond to these questions instead of gumming up the Act or gumming up the access to information system? The Information Commissioner has done a study on this. I hope you look at it, and she's said exactly what I'm saying, and she said, get it out of access to information, and this will be a big help to making things more streamlined and accessible.
Yeah, this picks up on a point by Ms. Hefner where we talk about more information being available or more access requests happening than ever before. A lot of reference has been made in this committee to vexatious requests or unnecessary requests from the public, which I think happen in such few or outlying instances. I think that this is, in fact, like insignificant when you think about the vexatious nature of government in this kind of example, when they're misusing the Access to Information Act to things that are unrelated for what it was intended to and using it for their own operations.
I have another question. Both of you and Mr. Jolly, you mentioned that you follow the deliberations here, and many times before, since the beginning of this program. My question is as follows. Assuming that everyone around the table is showing good faith, who from the government should we invite to give us information on the Access to Information system? Mr. Beebe?
Well, the system's overseen by Treasury Board. So one of my invitations would go to the President of the Treasury Board and perhaps to the equivalent to Deputy Minister there, because they are the ones that make key decisions about how this system works, and they should be held accountable for those decisions. Those are the two I would ask.
À part de ces deux personnes-là.
And beyond those two people, Mr. Conte, do you have any suggestions?
Yes, I would ask the Access to Information Coordinator of CSIS, and I would ask Amir Adarand, a constitutional lawyer who is well-versed in case law around constitutional challenges and the relevance of the constitutional overlap with the current state of the Act.
Merci, Monsieur Fergus.
Thank you, Mr. Fergus.
Je vais donner 10 secondes.
I will give you 10 seconds. We're at 5 minutes, 38 seconds.
Answer Mr. Trump, that would be great.
Oh, I would also be sure to invite the Justice Minister, who has often spoken on ATI Act before at committees, because he would deal with the law reform aspect of it.
Mr. Trump. Sorry, Mr. Jolly, please.
I might add, of course, the Prime Minister, Mr. Trudeau, as you know, this is something that's currently ultimately on his desk. And in 2015, upon taking office, he promised to make Canada his tenure one of Canada's most transparent government in history. And to date, I have failed to see much action on that front.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jolly. Monsieur Villemure, vous avez...
Mr. Villemure, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much. Mr. Beebe, without thinking of the Act, do you believe that all information should always be shared?
No. I don't. I believe in privacy rights, for example. I do think some deliberations of government need to be protected for open and honest discussion. So, no, I'm not saying I'm not being unreasonable. I don't think it should be, open to everyone. I think there are good cases to be made for protecting some kinds of information, security information, for example. But we need a watchdog to tell us when our politicians are abusing those protections for security, for privacy, for deliberations. And as I said in my remarks, at the cabinet level, we do not have a watchdog. Cabinet makes its own decisions, and you just have to live with them. There's no sheriff or ombudsperson to come in and say, let's have a second look at that.
Should the Commissioner of Information have access to, or have that power?
Yes. The Information Commissioner of Canada should be allowed to review decisions to withhold cabinet records. Absolutely. And it's not such a crazy idea. I mean, there's a professor at University of Ottawa, Jan Campanolo, who just wrote a book about this, and that was his recommendation, that the Information Commissioner should be authorized to review those kinds of decisions.
Thank you. Mr. Conte, do you believe in radical transparency?
What do you mean by radical transparency?
Transparency at all costs.
I mean, I believe in a system of government where citizens are, participating in a process where there is an honest brokerage of knowledge of what their governments are doing. This act does not do that.
D'accord. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
See, Monsieur Villemure.
Thank you, Mr. Villemure.
Okay. Next, we are going to go to Mr. Green for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Conte, in your article titled Canada Continues to Censor Internal Interviews on the Review of the Afghan War, you state that until we abolish the Access to Information Act and create an access system of civil liability, the current system of discretionary good faith will continue to be used as a de facto system of state censorship and a covert extension of the Official Secrets Act. Can you describe what an access system of civil liability would look like?
What referred to in testimony today and testimony from previous witnesses. If I don't pay my taxes, there are consequences. If there are rules to abide by in a collective society of things that are expected from you. According to the access.
I'll put the question more directly because I only have a limited amount of time. Are there countries that you have come across in your research that have, in your opinion, adequate systems of civil liability?
Well, I think from my experience in the United States, if a government doesn't play by the rules, there are, forms of infrastructure.
I've stopped the clock. We do have a point of order from Mr. Villemure. Monsieur Villemure, s'il vous plaît.
The interpreters can't hear Mr. Green correctly. His volume is too low.
We had this problem earlier. You miraculously corrected it, Mr. Green, I think by raising your voice a little bit more. If you can try that.
Sure,
I'm
happy to do that. Let the record show that I'm wearing a government-issued headset here.
Yep. Okay, thank you. And I'm sorry for interrupting, but please go ahead.
That's okay, sir. Yes, Mr. Conte, just in terms of finding international comparators that we might look to, you'd mentioned the United States. Is it through the courts that civilians can find remedies should the government fail to live up to its stated legislative requirements?
In the short term, when we consider degrees of policy shift that are possible, the only remedy is through the courts, and whether that's through financial penalties that are leveraged on government officials and departments, whether it's through other kinds of means. There currently are no consequences if people do not comply. An example would be even with C-58 order powers to the commissioner. There are government departments that are not complying with orders. There are government departments that are taking the commissioner to court over orders that the department, that the commissioner has issued. Why? Because
I'll share with you our own House of Commons in the last session of government. The Speaker of the House had to take the government to court just to get documents that we demanded for. I know my time is up, but I do appreciate the witnesses being present today to provide their expert testimony.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Green. We will now go to Mr. Barrett for 5 minutes as we continue the second round.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks to the witnesses for being here. And I'll just go through the panel with a couple questions. What is your longest outstanding ATIP? And I'll start with you, Mr. Beebe.
I can't be precise, but it would be in the order of 10 years.
Okay.
10 years.
Would you be able to say which department that is outstanding with?
I'm pretty sure it was Privy Council office.
Okay. Mr. Conte?
the longest standing that I have ongoing is with Library Archives Canada. That goes back to 2018.
2018?
Yes.
Okay. And Mr. Trump, what would be your longest outstanding ATIP request that you have with the Government of Canada?
I would say the worst backlog department in regards to journalism is the RCMP, and I have requests dating back at least 6 or 7 years. And it's almost a disaster in there.
Okay, and our did we lose our other witness?
Mr. Jolly.
Mr. Jolly, are you still there? Okay.
It appears that we've lost Mr. Jolly, so hopefully, like before, we get him back as soon as possible. We'll carry on, Mr. Barrett.
He might have succumbed to the wait for his longest ATIP. Or maybe he's reading his. Maybe it's finally arrived. Has the failure of the government to make ATIP deadlines affected your ability to accurately report on what's happening in government?
Yes. I mean, call it deadline abuse. Some departments, like RCMP, don't even acknowledge receipt of your request. So there's no clock even ticking for some sort of limbo requests. And I think there's a reflexive mode in departments to automatically take the longest stretch that they can get away with because it just gives them more maneuvering room rather than working out exactly how long processing will actually take. And the Information Commissioner has come down on departments for this. But the result is that requests from journalists in particular are just held in abeyance for months and months, and sometimes years and years, as I've given some examples, until the information is no longer embarrassing, dangerous, whatever. So yes, it does indeed affect us.
Mr. Conte, well, I have this, the same question. I guess what I'd ask is, do you believe that this damages trust, public trust in media? That there could be public interest in an issue, and there's no reporting on it, no substantive reporting on it in media, because they're not able to get the information that would substantiate or flush out the story.
I mean, it definitely affects the content of stories and the political content of stories as well. If we're talking about state information, I mean, what I think to just to point out on the RCMP topic, the RCMP, not only are they not acknowledging, I had a communication from them. 5 or 6 years after I filed the request, they sent me a letter asking me if I was still interested in my request. But to your question, I think that, if we, just by comparison, in the United States, the Act privileges public dissemination of knowledge, right? So if you have an urgent issue of government activity that you need to report on, you can be at the top of the queue in terms of expedited processing, which here we don't have. It surprises me that not more journalists are coming before this committee, especially of legacy media institutions, this is their business, the public dissemination of knowledge as it pertains, especially as it pertains to the state. There is an absence of this, which speaks to a lot of the points of a disinterest in access to information from journalism as a whole, and as a result, on the quality of journalism about the government.
Right, and how much time do I have left, Chair? Well, I guess I just say that the challenge is if the public don't know what they don't know, then it's tough for them to be agents of change in the system. So I know there's some frustration that this issue has been studied by successive parliaments and multiple committees. I think it's important, and I appreciate the testimony of the witnesses.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Mr. Trump, I see your hand up. Is it a technical issue or what?
No,
what?
If I could speak briefly to the question of delays.
Unless it's asked in the next round by Ms. Khalid. I'm sorry, sir. This question and answer here. So maybe Ms. Khalid, please go ahead for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair. Interesting conversation today from the witnesses. I appreciate your feedback. The Information Commissioner was asked how much of a drain is vexatious, malicious, or frivolous ATIPs on their office. And they had to say it has a huge impact. My office is only 3 people dealing with our own access requests. Last year, we received a request that ended up with 33,000 pages. We ourselves had to request an extension because we are subject to the Act as well. We don't want to say no to access requests, but sometimes we are realizing that it's difficult to negotiate or try to understand what is behind the request. I'm sure that institutions, as I said, all have their 1 or 2 or 3 requesters who are difficult or who are asking for information where at the end of the day you wonder, what are you going to do with those 22 million pages? So I ask you, Mr. Beebe, as a person, with an investigative journalism background, and I have ultimate regard for the role of journalists in being the watchdogs of how government operates and how we provide services to Canadians. How do you feel about this current influx of what I like to call blogger journalism, where an opinion becomes or is then maybe trying to change public opinion or taking away from that public trust of what is an organization that is the government? Do you think that has an impact in how ATIPs are being responded to right now?
I'm not sure I see the connection there. I know that, to me, as a journalist, access to information is a way to avoid opinion journalism, or journalism that goes he said, and you try to work out something in between. And so to me, when you call it blogger journalism, I assume you mean like opinion journalism, that sort of thing. Well, to me, access to information is an answer to this. We talk about all the misinformation and blogs out there and trying to persuade people one way or another using misinformation. Access to information is an answer to that problem by giving data that has been provided by government and vetted and whatever, giving sort of a hard factual basis to investigative journalism. That's why I have used the Act for my whole career, because I think it's a more reliable, less challengeable source of information for investigative stories, right? I'm not sure that answers your question.
It does. Thank you. I appreciate that, Mr. Beebe. Mr. Conte, you had earlier mentioned that you received an article that was redacted by CSIS. Now, my understanding under the Act is that publications are exempt from redactions because, well, they're already public. So can you help us understand what exactly was redacted that you were seeking that was an article that had already been published?
So if you're a researcher today wanting to research Canadian security state records somewhat expediently, you have to look at research that has already been done because a request, a historical request, it's likely the CSIS archive and RCMP Security Service archive is at LAC under volume RG 146. These are a transfer of records from CSIS that they still have control over. All of the records that are there are from previously released. You can access a collection of previous release access to information packages while you wait for your own access to information requests to happen. Those transfers happened in the 90s. There used to be a CSIS reading room that used to go to that, I never went to because I was too young at that time. But in those access to information release packages that were processed in the 90s, there are several redactions that tell a story of how CSIS was redacting and censoring documents then and speak to the arguments of lack of over-censorship, of the Office Information Commissioner of over-censorship, both then and now, right? Because even today, as the
Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but I was specifically asking about that one instance where you received a redacted public article.
We're over the 5 minutes. But
I have one last question, Chair, if you'll indulge me. Please.
You know how much I hate cutting people off. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. It's a very, very short question to Mr. Beebe. You talked about cabinet confidence earlier. Now, as a committee, we use in-camera deliberations to talk about specific witnesses, sensitive matters. Ultimately, we do release what the final result of our deliberations is. Do you think that committee in-camera discussions should also be subject to ETHI?
Quick response, please, Mr. Beebe.
I believe in protecting deliberations that deserve protection. That's all I can say. It's sort of a hypothetical. I'm not sure what kind of in-camera discussion you're talking about. Okay. But I'm not opposed to protection of cabinet deliberations. I just think that the system we have has gotten out of hand. I think the definition of cabinet confidence is expanding every year so that it covers more and more non-cabinet documents.
Thank you. Merci. Thank you, Mr. Beebe. Merci. On va commencer.
Thank you. We'll start with the next round of questions. I just want to note that we do not see our witnesses on the screen. We're going to start with Mr. Couric for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and it's been a fascinating conversation. Mr. Trump, I'd like to give you an opportunity to answer the question that my colleague Mr. Barrett had asked about, some of the challenges associated with trust in media because media is not able to access some of this information. So if you want to respond to that, I know you had put your hand up there before.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. Well, this is one of the reasons I created the database of every ATIP news story produced by ATIP requests since 1983. That's over 6,000 of them, was to demonstrate to the public the value of the ATIP system and the danger of losing it, which we have now with newsrooms sometimes cut back in half, newspapers with bankruptcy and massive industrial decline. And some of that will be picked up by freelancers and new digital media, but far, far less than before. And it's a double whammy with that, the industry under strain, plus the ATIP system failing so much. One of the question was raised about the problem of delays and how, yes, I've had stories quashed because of delays. The information was no longer relevant. One of the major problems is that in our law, our ATIP law, extensions, the reply can be extended for an unspecified, quote, reasonable period of time, unquote, with no day limit set. That could mean anything to anyone. So that allows it, it's a blank check. It allows it to be extended potentially forever. And that's a part of the law that most nations with FY law would never accept. Also, there is a 30-year in average response time in most FY laws in the world is 2 weeks. That is half the level of the initial response time of 30 days in the ATIP law. So even countries, much poorer countries with weak administrative systems respond much faster in sometimes a week or two. So it's a question of political will, usually, not always resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trump. And yeah, just to note, I had my team go through an overview of many systems around the world, and certainly Canada does not rank highly in either the ratings or just when looking at some of the access requests. Now only have about 2.5 minutes. So, Mr. Jolly, I know you were lost but have been found. So it's good to have you back. Wonder if you have anything to add about the trust related to ATIPs and specifically how that affects the media.
Yeah, absolutely. This has not been a very good ad for Bell Internet, I'll have to add. I think, yeah, to the point about openness and transparency, I think we've definitely moved far away from the default being openness. And I think that's a mistake that needs to be corrected right away. I think we're increasingly turning, the citizens' right to know into the government's right to say no to legitimate requests for government information. And I think that has a trickle-down effect all down the information and societal food chain, right from journalists and news organizations being able to use these requests to report on information, right to citizens being able to access relevant materials and researchers that they need for their own work.
Right. Thanks for that. And certainly, as was mentioned, Parliament saw firsthand some of this when the government took the Speaker to court over the release of some information in the previous Parliament, and now that issue was disposed of because of an election call. So certainly, there's a host of challenges here. Now, Mr. Beebe, changing gears here, proactive disclosure. I know you mentioned that, but certainly when I look at what I think will be a recommendation to bring forward, proactive disclosure has a place on something like the immigration backlog. When having the ability for somebody who has been denied, for example, something related to immigration, to ensure that they don't have to go through the system. So I'm just wondering, in the last 30 seconds or so, if you could maybe just talk a little bit about proactive disclosure in the sense of not so much briefing notes from a high-level departmental perspective, but more the specific instances.
Problem with proactive disclosure as it sits in the law in Bill C-58, which changed the Access Act, is it defines a very small number of documents, so-called ministerial documents, that are going to be released on the government's timetable and with no watchdog. So to me, proactive disclosure is a red herring. It's just a way to divert our attention from fixing the main problem, which is the Access to Information Act's dysfunctionality. On the issue of the immigration files, there's a big privacy issue there, and I don't think proactive disclosure in that sense is possible. It has to be a client-to-client kind of disclosure. But, I just don't accept proactive disclosure as some kind of panacea for the system. It's not. And it diverts our energies and attention from the big problem, which is a dysfunctional act.
Thank you, Mr. Beebe. Thank you, Mr. Kirk. Perhaps now's the time for the disclaimer that the opinion expressed on Internet connectivity by Mr. Jolly does not necessarily reflect those of the committee. Any publication Anyways, thank you, sir. I have Ms. Sachs now for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And through you, I'd like to direct my attention to Mr. Trump, if I may. Mr. Trump, I had an opportunity to skim through some of your book, and I'd like to note your comments about how the Harper government in 2006 had pledged to provide a general public interest override for all exemptions, yet did not fulfill that promise. And then in a subsequent paragraph, you talked about the contemplation by the Conservative Party to look at ETHI exemptions and put them to a harms test, which also wasn't fulfilled. And you then go on into Chapter 8 of your book to talk about that the Liberal Party kept its 2015 pledge to grant Information Commissioner the power to order the release of government information under Bill C-58. So we see a process which, under the Harper years, media actually complained that they really didn't have a lot of contact with the Harper government in disclosures and discussions. And in 2015, the government came in with a promise to move forward in an open and transparent way. And you cite Bill C-58. So where are we in the consideration of exemptions now, and have we moved ahead in terms of, we've heard the comments from Mr. Beebe about proactive disclosure and where it's not meeting this mark. I'd like your thoughts on that, if I may.
Yes, well, there certainly has been some progress made, but the fact that the office of the Prime Minister and ministers are no longer covered, as the Prime Minister promised to do in the 2015 election campaign, is a failing. And also the Commissioner's power to order the release of government records is most welcome here. However, the Commissioner, Suzanne Legault, in a report found 5 serious shortcomings in that power, which are mostly absent in the rest of the world that I studied, such as the de novo review and the lack of enforcement, etc. However, it was a start. And of course, we still need the cabinet records to be subject to the Commissioner's review, and also no longer a complete exemption from the Act like it is in only one other country in the world, South Africa, but a mandatory exemption, which it was in the first version of the ATIP law in 1979. Also, yes, the Harper's government 8 pledges in 2006 for ATI reform, all 7.5 were not fulfilled. There was some coverage of some foundations and crown corporations.
Thank you for that. I'd like to go into, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I really want to go into the cabinet confidence. You mentioned that South Africa and Canada are the only ones with complete exemptions on cabinet confidence. Exclusions. Correct. Thank you for correcting me on that. But it's quite common throughout the Commonwealth, I understand, to have exclusions of cabinet confidence. Where else in the world can you cite examples where there is open, there is an open platform access to cabinet confidence? Can you cite one?
Well, not. Sorry, I have some echo problem here. Not a complete openness to deliberations, obviously. And New Zealand has somewhat of a more open system where background records are released almost very soon after decisions are made. The 20-year time limit is excessive by far. It can only be withheld for 10 years in Nova Scotia's FOI law for cabinet records. It also, latest Commonwealth FOI law in the world out of Ghana in 2019 has a fine harms test for cabinet records where they can only be withheld if they would, quote, undermine the deliberative process. Well, not all cabinet records release would undermine the deliberative process. It needs to be more precise and nuanced.
Thank you for that. And who would decide if there was an issue that there, to be able, in your opinion, who should be the czar to determine if there could be an override?
The Commissioner and the courts.
The Commissioner and the courts. How much time do I have, Chair?
You have 35 seconds.
Okay. To Mr. Beebe, quickly, you cite that much of what's on open government is irrelevant, which includes contracts, ministerial briefings, any funding over 10K. So what would be relevant if that's not relevant?
Well, I mean, I think you're just talking about cabinet confidences. I think cabinet could more could proactively release the data and background information upon which it made its decisions. They could do that soon after making the decision rather than letting us wait 20 years. So there's an example of a deliberative kind of document that is unnecessarily withheld, and it helps us understand why government made its decisions. I don't see the problem if it's not, touching on the actual discussion around the table, if it's, merely data and background.
Okay, merci. Merci, Monsieur Bibi.
Thank you, Mr. Beebe. We'll start with Mr. Villemur for 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Conde, you talked about the difference between the Canadian and the American system. You said that in the United States, if it was deemed to be important, it was put at the top of the line, correct?
I mean, you have to file an expedited processing request, yes.
So, for classification after that, is it more censored than what we'd have here or less on average?
So, in the U.S., there is a 25-year declassification system, after which they are uncensored, declassified to the greatest extent possible. In Canada, the only way to declassify a document is through an access to information request. So which is like one at a time, depending who is requesting.
In a scientific article I saw recently that in the United States, documents are often classified too secret than needed, that public servants were trying to protect themselves more than necessary. Do you agree with that statement?
I mean, to be honest, I don't have that expert knowledge, but I can imagine it existing because, the American system is not perfect when it comes to censorship, delays, appeals, and so on. But this problem is more prevalent here in Canada.
Merci beaucoup. Monsieur Trump.
Thank you. Mr. Trump, you shared 206 recommendations, but what would be your 2 main recommendations?
I believe the cabinet exclusion should be converted into a mandatory exemption. And also the commissioner should have the right to view the records to see if they're properly classified. As well, the second would be the policy advice exemption, which needs a harms test and a 10-year limit and a clear statement that backgrounds and analysis and facts cannot be withheld as analysis. That's a good start anyway. There's more.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Merci, Monsieur Villemur.
Thank you, Mr. Villemur.
Monsieur Green, pour 2 minutes.
Mr. Green, you have 2.5 minutes.
Mr. Beebe, in a blog post, you stated that in 2009, an aide to the Public Works Minister blocked the release of a document you requested. It was reported that this was a clear case of political interference, but the RCMP dropped their preliminary investigation. Why do you believe the investigation was dropped?
As to RCMP files, RCMP investigated that case, so I only know that they announced that they would not lay charges against that individual. But I understand that it's proving criminal intent. That's the problem. There's a section in the Act with criminal penalties, but to meet that standard, you have to prove intent, and I think they were somehow not able to show that in that case.
Do you then have any recommendations regarding who might be more adequate, given this kind of gray area, to investigate these kinds of cases?
Well, this case is interesting because it had to do with a political aid to a minister. And one quirk of the law, of the Access Act, is that the Information Commissioner, when she discovers some bad behavior by a political aid, she cannot ask the Justice Minister, Attorney General, to investigate because they're somehow exempt from her purview. So this is a real problem with the Act. It could be fixed so simply, and I think that's one loophole we have to close. So I'm not sure that
Specifically, that's perfect, but could you be specific about how you would propose to close that loop? Are you suggesting then to bring political aides into the regime of oversight?
Bring political aides into the same arena as all public servants so that they have to be held accountable for their bad behavior in withholding or destroying records.
And in your opinion, could it still present a problem if you have the Attorney General, the Minister of Justice, being ultimately left with the decision whether to pursue or prosecute or investigate political staffers?
Well, they don't. They merely refer to RCMP and then I think Public Prosecution Service. So we do have some arm's length institutions that would take care of that conflict of interest, I think.
Perhaps you have more faith in those than I do. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Those are my questions.
Merci, Mr. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Green. We're going to move to our last two questions, Mr. Gould and Mr. Fergus. 2.5 minutes each. Mr. Gould, you have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chair. To all the witnesses, if I ask a question at the House, the minister might not be able to answer the question, and they will then request a briefing in the next 24 hours in case I ask the question the next day so that they are well aware of the situation. That same question, if you were to ask it, do you believe that you would get a response in 24 hours or rather in 2 years? Mr. Didi.
Well, this is the double frustration of being a journalist. You're not only waiting for answers from Access to Information, but you're waiting literally weeks sometimes for answers from departments and ministers' offices. So I think I would be waiting at least as long as you are.
Mr. Conte?
Mr. Conte?
I don't have the expertise to answer that question.
Mr. Joly?
Yeah, I think that would be a fair assessment. I think we need to, again, reiterate my point, be towards a culture of openness and default to openness. Otherwise, I think, situations will only continue to get worse. And
Trump.
Mr. Trump.
You are mute.
Hi. Yes, it was the purpose of all my work is to raise Canada's FOI law up to accepted global standards, and that's not a radical or unreasonable goal at all, because MPs do not need to leap into the future, but merely step into the present. We are now rated like 52nd in the world, and in regards to our FOI law quality, we can do much, much better than that, obviously.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci, Monsieur Gould.
Thank you, Mr. Gould. Mr. Fergus, you have 2.5 minutes.
Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Beebe, two questions, and they're related, so I'd appreciate if you could be pretty quick on it. Recently, the Ford government has decided took a decision to have development in Ontario's green belt. Is the decision not enough? Do you need to know what went into the deliberations which led to that decision?
Yes, you do. You want to know whether...
Sorry.
On the mic.
Microphone.
Hello?
There you go.
Sorry. Yes, you do need to know, because you need to know whether there's been undue influence on cabinet by corporations or developers or whatever. Of course, that's part of the concern that citizens have about their governments. Are they listening to the wrong people instead of the citizens?
On that point, the human factor is really important here. You've in your testimony, you described the importance of having the Information Commissioner to be the arbiter of what should be considered a cabinet confidence or not. But isn't that just making everything subject to the quality of the information commissioner? I mean, what are, as parliamentarians, if we're going to propose changes, we're supposed to propose changes, I think, that's based on a principle. What is a principle that you would like us to consider?
On that issue, if the record contains deliberations, then protect. If the record is merely information provided to inform those deliberations, not protected. And
all right, so then back to the first example. Do you think that the officials would have had that information, basic information saying sell the Greenbelt? Or would that have been more part of that deliberative process?
No, that typically Cabinet would have been presented with options. If you do this, then this. If you do B, then C, or whatever. So I think it is common, it's not only possible, but it's common that cabinets review information that is not urging a particular course. That's the job of Cabinet, to make that decision. It's records that merely inform, give background data. And in defense of the Information Commissioner, she is appointed by Parliament, and she is a high-quality individual. So I have a lot of faith in Parliament's ability to pick quality candidates to make those hard decisions about what's in and out in Cabinet.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Fergus. Mr. Fergus, I see your hand.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move that we reopen the debate that we had left off with at our last meeting.
Okay, we have a motion to resume debate where we left off in the last meeting. Do I see any objection from the committee on that? No need for a vote. We have consensus. I don't see Mr. Green. You good? Okay. So we're going to continue on debate, but before we do, I just want to say thank you to our witnesses for coming today. You shared some extremely valuable information with the committee, and I apologize to those who are online for the technical difficulties. I would invite you, if there is anything that you may have missed today, to provide in writing to the committee clerk so that we can consider that within our deliberations. But again, I want to say thank you on behalf of the committee and on behalf of Canadians as well. Thank you. So I'm going to dismiss the witnesses and we'll continue on. Mr. Fergus, when we left, you had the floor on an amendment, and so I'd like to go back to you on that, please.
I believe, Mr. Chair, that there's been discussions between all parties, so I don't want to prolong the debate. I think there is a general consensus. I hope that will continue. So I'd like to perhaps put the question on.
Okay, so on the amendment, any discussion on the amendment? No? We have consensus on that, or do we need a recorded vote? We have consensus. Mr. Green? Mr. Villemure, thank you. So we're on the main motion now. As amended, I will remind the committee that we do have a work plan that we are still following. We have the commissioners coming on the supplementary Bs on Monday, and then we do have a witness appearing next Wednesday, and that may take us up until the new year, so this study may not continue until that point. But on the motion as amended, Mr. Fergus, I'm sorry.
Just a quick, again, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to just reaffirm this to all members that I think there's confidence that the spirit of will be reflected, not necessarily the letter, and we offer you that discretion to make sure that we do the business of our committee that had already been planned first, and then we move on.
Okay, I appreciate that because, as you can imagine, these are difficult days leading up to Christmas, trying to get witnesses for the clerk and the analysts, so I do appreciate a little bit of latitude. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, do we have consensus on the motion as amended? Yes. Okay, it's approved unanimously. Thank you for that. Any other business? I don't see any. I will move to adjourn the meeting. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.